Hello to all the viewers of this 8th topic, titled The Kingdom of Babylon. 5 Part A. Part A, I divided it because I thought it will be too long. We will see. Now, 5 minutes earlier, I put in question mark behind it, the Kingdom of Babylon. And why I did that, I will tell you in another topic. So let us start. We start with 2 Peter 3. This is the hope of the Christians and the believers since ever. Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. Now that is the promise God is giving. He will make a new earth and a new heaven in which righteousness dwells. Now it has always been man's attempt to establish a kingdom, to establish a system where righteousness is dwelling. And too often man tried it without God. And even if man is trying to establish that kingdom with God, it will fail because it's failing because of our sinfulness. And the last attempt probably, or not the last attempt, but one example where man tried to establish a system of righteousness without God is socialism. And there is a book that is called The Black Book of Socialism, Communism. Now this is translated from German to English. I don't know if this book exists in English and if this is the title for it in English. But yeah, this is a direct translation. And this is dealing with socialism. And in this book it states that there are 25 million deaths through national socialist system. And I put the color brown behind it because for me this is brown socialism. And 100 million deaths through socialist/communist system. This is, so to say, red socialism. So socialism colored in red. And the other is socialism colored in brown, painted in brown. So these are over 100 million deaths because of these systems, socialist systems. And when I look in today's world and the developments of in the past years and decades, for me it appears like we are trying to establish another socialism, and this time we painted it. Now we had red and we had brown and it didn't work that well. So now let's paint it in green. Now we are moving towards a green socialism, so to say. It's a eco-socialism. Okay, that's at least the words that I know, for example, in my university, and so, and it's basically something like an international socialism. And I mean, we will see how many deaths it will require, because this time this is not a local system, but a global system. Okay, we will see. So it's all dealing with socialism. You just paint it in different colors. But it has the same mindset. And basically what is common to all these is that they are driven by ideology and not by truth, and not by fact. In Revelation 18, after these things I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried mightily with a loud voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become a dwelling place of demons, a prison for every false spirit, and a cage for every unclean and hated bird. And for me it's interesting that this is a text that is referring to the end time. It's interesting that the angel, even at the end of times, is classifying the animal world in clean and unclean animals. And that the unclean animals are listed here with foul spirits and demons, so something that is despisable. Okay, just as a side note. Verse 3, For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, the harlot's fornication. The kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. Now what is important for us here to this point is that the Bible is speaking for the end of days of a kingdom that will be established, and she's calling that kingdom Babylon. And there are four actors, so to say. The first is the harlot. which is called Babylon. The second are the kings of the earth. The third are the merchants and the shipmasters of the earth. And the fourth is the inhabitants of the earth. Now the harlot is called the mother of all harlots. That means she has daughters. Okay, we see this in Revelation 17. And of the kings of the earth, it says that they committed fornication with the harlot. The merchants of the earth, they became rich through that system. And the inhabitants of the earth, they are made drunk by the wine. And we will have a closer look at all this at the end of this presentation. And of all these actors, it says of the earth. And that shows us that we are dealing here with a global system. This is a world system. Okay, this is not a local system. I'm saying this because some Christians, they think when they hear Babylon at the end of times, they're looking to Iraq and they are thinking, oh, Saddam Hussein, he tried to do something there. So this is Babylon, or he's maybe the Antichrist or something like this. This is a world system. This is a global system. This has nothing to do with any local things that are going on in some country. Okay? It's the kings of the earth, the merchants of the earth, it's the inhabitants of the earth. It's a global system. Now, the driving force behind all this is the devil. And why is he? We have to remember that we stated in the previous topics, and that is that the devil's goal for this earth is to establish his kingdom of rebellion. And with establishing this kingdom of Babylon on this earth, he finally achieves his goal. Okay, so he's the driving force behind all this. Now, if we want to understand Babylon, because that's a symbol that the Bible is using, and she's taking this term from the Old Testament and from history. And if we want to understand what this is basically talking about, we have to understand Babylon. What is Babylon in the past? Okay, and we start with the ancient Babylonian Empire. Now, I just want to state here that this is, I'm using this term to describe another era, another period in this earth's history. Typically, when you read about ancient Babylonian Empire, it's referring to what I titled in this presentation the Old-Babylonian Empire, and then you have the New-Babylonian Empire. Okay. Now, some Christians make a division between what I call the ancient Babylonian Empire and what this is, you will see in a moment. And they make a difference between the ancient Babylonian Empire and the Old-Babylonian Empire, and some put this in one pot. Okay, but yeah, I divide it. I think that's the only reason you can do it, if you take the Bible really serious. In Genesis 10, we have the table of nations. We already had looked at this in a previous topic. And there from verse 7, it reads, so this is after the fall, okay? And you have the three sons of Noah, Sem, Ham, and Japheth, and it says, oh, the sons of Sem are these, and the sons of Ham are these, and the sons of Japheth are these. And we are here dealing with the sons of Ham, so the cursed one. And we are here at the point where it says about the sons of Cush, and he was a son of Ham. The sons of Cush were Seba, Havila, Sabta, Raama, and Sabtecha. And the sons of Raama were Sheba and Dedan. Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. Now, stop here. It's interesting that it says here in verse 7, the sons of Cush were Seba, Havila, Sabta, Raama, and Sabtecha. And then it goes over to the sons of Raama. And it appears like the list for the sons of Cush is over. But then in verse 8, it says, Cush begot Nimrod. So Nimrod is set apart in this list. He's not listed in verse 7, although he could be, because he's a son of Cush. He's listed separately. And why is that? And this obviously is because Nimrod plays an important role in this whole table of nations. So he was a very prominent figure obviously, in his time. And he played an important role. Okay? That's why he's listed separately, just to have this in mind. Then it reads, Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. And the ESV says, this is another translation, I think it's English Standard Version or something like this. He was the first on earth to be a mighty man. And I think this is the better translation for this. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. From the land he went to Assyria and built Nineveh, Reboth-ir, Kala, and Resen, between Nineveh and Kala. That is the principal city. Now I want to just point you to the fact that linked to Nimrod's activity is the city of Babel and the land of Shinar. Okay? And we will come across this again. So what are we learning from Nimrod? Nimrod says he was the first mighty man on earth. He conquered other cities and subjected them violently. And he established a kingdom. It says the beginning of his kingdom was in Babel. That's where his kingdom started, in Babel. And he conducted campaigns toward northeast up to Assur. Now, the name Nimrod means rebel or the revolting one. And what is that? I mean, when you read something like this, you have to ask yourself, rebel against whom? Against what? The revolting one. Revolting against whom? Against what? And the answer is, he was rebelling against God. Okay, that's what he was. He tried to be a ruler in God's place, to establish a kingdom in God's place. Because that's what he did. I mean, God is the ruler, and God is to rule over man. God has never told any man to rule over another. And I think I already said this when we were talking about, when we were around this text here. I don't know what presentation. I think it was the first one. And there I stated that, no, it was the second one, where we talked about a life according to God's design, where we saw that the faithful ones, they always used to have contrary living. And that it was the sinful line of Cain that started to build cities, that started to concentrate power and influence. And the next step for building a city is to build a kingdom. And that's what Nimrod did after the flood. And he did that because of the same reason why Cain built a city, in order to concentrate power and to rule over others. And this is not in harmony with God's will. Okay, so he was a ruler in God's place. He wanted to establish a kingdom on this earth. He didn't want to wait for God's kingdom to come in. He did whenever. So his kingdom was to be in the place of God's kingdom. And this is the kingdom of Babylon. So and that's why Nimrod becomes a symbol for the Antichrist, and why his kingdom is becoming the symbol for the Antichrist's kingdom. Because he had the very same mindset to establish a kingdom on this earth that is standing in the place of God's kingdom. And these information, they form the background for chapter 11. We are in chapter 10 here. We have the table of nations. We have Nimrod very closely described, because usually the table of nations read like A begot B, and B begot C, and C begot D, D begot... And only for Nimrod, it stops, and it's describing Nimrod relatively precise. And the reason it does that, because it lays the foundation for what is then following in chapter 11. And I already told you to pay attention for that the beginning of Nimrod's kingdom was in Babel, and that he established a kingdom in the land of Shinar. Okay. Now we go to chapter 11, and this is the story about the Tower of Babel. And we read, "Now the whole earth had one language and one speech, and it came to pass as they journeyed from," and the better translation would be to the east, "that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said, Come, let us build ourselves a city, and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of man had built. And the Lord said, Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do." So we are dealing obviously with the city of Babel here, because the story is called the Tower of Babel. And in verse 1 we read that this is taking place in the land of Shinar. And now it says they are building a tower. And obviously are building the tower lest they be scattered abroad the face of the earth. So they built the tower in order to hold unity. And why are they struggling with this? Why do they see that there is the danger of being scattered, to lose that unity? And I would say it's because of the increasing expansion of Nimrod's kingdom. The kingdom is growing, and the greater the kingdom becomes, the more difficult it is to have unity. Okay, and this is a challenge that every ruler of a large kingdom has. And so they have this idea to build the tower, and this tower serves as a centralization. The tower should be a landmark and the center of that city of Babel, and thus of the whole kingdom. The tower should be the landmark and center of the whole kingdom. Now it says in verse 7 that God then says, okay, come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thereover the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel. So we have Shinar and Babel, like in Nimrod's report, and this is a very strong hint for us, and the fact that Nimrod is so precisely described prior to that story, that Nimrod has something to do with the Tower of Babel, okay, with building that tower, that he was involved in this. And we read in Josephus, he was a historian, Flavius Josephus, he wrote, "Now it was Nimrod who excited them to such an affront and contempt of God," and he's commenting the Tower of Babel. "He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, a bold man and of great strength of hand. He persuaded them not to ascribe it to God as if it was through his means they were happy, but to believe that it was for their own courage which procured that happiness. He also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning man from the fear of God, but to bring them into a constant dependence on his power. He also said he would be revenged on God if he should have a mind to drown the world again. For that he would build a tower too high for the waters to be able to reach, and that he would avenge himself on God for destroying their forefathers." Now it's too funny, this idea to build a tower that is so high that God couldn't reach that tower. Okay, but that's sometimes how stupid man can become if man is totally separating himself from God. Okay. I mean, for God, this must be something like ridiculous. I mean, man built a tower to heaven, to reach heaven. And God says, oh, we have to go down to and see if we can find the tower somewhere down. Okay. So even for God, mankind can build as high as he wants. For God, this is still nothing. Nothing. Paragraph 3. "Now the multitude were very ready to follow the determination of Nimrod, and to esteem it a piece of cowardice to submit to God. And they built a tower, neither sparing any pains, nor being in any degree negligent about the work. And by reason of the multitude of hands employed in it, it grew very high, sooner than anyone could expect." So Flavius Josephus is clearly telling us that Nimrod was involved in this whole building project. Now, but this building project here was not just an eager building project. This was driven by rebellion against God. Because the Nimrod was involved in this, and it also has a religious character. Okay, this is not just about building, it has a religious character. And we see this already in the name Babel. Babel is coming from Babylim, Babylonian language, Babylim, which means gate of God or gate of gods. So, or gate to God. So the tower was to be the gate to the gods. And therefore its top should reach also to the heavens, because it should be, they want to come to the gods, as close to the gods as possible. So this tower had a religious aspect as well. So let us summarize. The Tower of Babel, the ancient Babylonian Empire, was established by Nimrod. It was a world power, a world empire. I mean, it's obvious if it was the first empire to be established on this earth, and since it's the first, it's also world empire because it's the only one that is there. Okay, and it's ruling the world. It was founded by a united mankind. Mankind was one. It was founded upon the spirit of rebellion against God. And then we have the tower. The tower was to be the landmark and center of the empire. This tower served the unity of mankind, and that is important. It should keep mankind together. And it was linked to a false form of worship, the gates to the gods, and led to the exclusion, maybe even suppression of those that thought differently. Now that's what they said, okay? They found it's cowardice to follow God's will and God's law, and they wanted to be their own lords, and they wanted to build this tower as a sign also of independence from God. Now, what about those that thought this is maybe not a good idea? Those that wanted to stay faithful to God. Were they accepted in a society like this? They certainly suffered from exclusion, okay, as I said, maybe even suppression. So we have a united mankind that is uniting in rebellion against God, and you have a certain group that thinks differently and they will suffer. I have a text that is summarizing this a little bit. With the loss of the uniform language, I mean, I didn't reread this, but I didn't comment on this. God came down, that's what the text said, and he confused the languages. And so they had to stop their building project because they couldn't communicate anymore. I mean, there were two workers standing there, and one said to the other, "Please give me the hammer." And he didn't understand what he said to him. And both of them were thinking that the other is mocking him. Okay, and so, yeah, it must be, yeah. So they had to stop building their, stop their project. Now, for me, it's also interesting. The devil tried to unite mankind in rebellion against God. That's what he tried to achieve with his Tower of Babel project. Now God came down, and God just made like this. He confused the languages, and it so completely shattered the plans of the devil that it cost him 5,000 years of work in order to bring mankind back to this point again, to unite it against God. So God is so powerful, okay? There is no way rebelling against him. He is always superior, okay? He's always superior. With the loss of the uniform language, the unity among the people was also lost. A situation that continues to this day, still. But it is not difficult to see that there are very strong efforts to reverse this development. It is interesting to see how God assessed the unity of the people back then. Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. God is certainly not an opponent of unity. On the contrary, but in order to protect mankind, he thought it best to divide mankind into different peoples and languages. For the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. Man carries evil within himself from childhood on. If humanity remained one, it would again all too quickly agree to rebel against God's rule and would again bring the entire earth to the brink of destruction. In these days, we are witnessing efforts being made to undo this providence of God. The Bible also informs us that the construction of Babylon will be resumed at the end of times, but on a spiritual level. A united humanity would again agree in its rebellion against God and thus succumb to the final judgment. What should be averted will happen because what God instituted will be undone. Now we are in the 11th chapter here, and we just saw mankind uniting. They want to make their own name. They want to glorify their own name. And in the next chapter, in chapter 12, there is a person introduced whose attitude is directly contrary to the tower builders. In Genesis 12, we read, Now the Lord had said to Abram, Get out of your country, from your family and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. A closer look reveals a great contrast between the two chapters. In chapter 11, the people built the tower to make a name for themselves and to make man forget God. In chapter 12, God promises that he would make a great name for Abram if he only remained loyal to him and glorified God's name before people. And to be honest, who knows the tower builders by name today? Few in the world have ever heard of Nimrod, the most famous of them, but very many know the name and person of Abram. Our conclusion, making a name for ourselves is God's job, not ours, because he can simply do it first better, second with lasting effect, and third without endangering our eternal life. Okay, so they had to stop their building project, and the tower and the city, they were not finished. Okay, we read here, But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of man had built. Then God speaks, Come, let us go down and there confuse the language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Now, you could easily imagine that this intervention of God had left its mark on Nimrod's empire, on Nimrod's kingdom, and it decayed. Okay. Then later we have this era of the so-called Old-Babylonian Empire, or sometimes called Ancient Babylonian Empire. And we know that Babel was devastated through Sargon von Akkad about 2300 before Christ. And this led that Babylon was meaningless. It was a meaningless small city for many centuries. Now, but there came a king that is called Hammurabi I, and he was a very talented king. And he transformed this meaningless city into an important empire and founded, so to say, this old Babylonian Empire. And he led it to supremacy in Mesopotamia. And he was also building on a tower that how he says, whose top is sky high. Okay, so you have, again, this theme of building a tower whose top goes to the heavens. In the 16th century, now the problem is that after Hammurabi, there was not such a talented ruler anymore, and the empire becomes continuously weaker. And in the 16th century, it was conquered by the Kassites, and that meant the end to the Babylonian Empire, to the Old Babylonian Empire. And again, it disappeared for many centuries in the spheres of meaninglessness. Now, this dream of Babylon as the world empire came to life again, and it became reality for some time in the era of the New-Babylonian Empire. And then we have the names we have to bring up here is Nabopolassar. And he broke the yoke of the Assyrians that was for 200 years upon Babylon. He conquered Assur and Nineveh and thus broke this yoke. And then he had a son. His son is Nebuchadnezzar, and this is more known because of the Bible. And he moved towards the Mediterranean Sea. He drove the Egyptians out of Palestine. And then we also have this conquest of Judea, the southern kingdom of Israel, Judah. And there he took the Elite captive and brought them to Babylon. And that's where the book of Daniel is coming in here. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was not only a very talented and brilliant military leader and a prudent politician, he was also a very talented and active builder. And he beautified Babylon with numerous building measures. And that's why these self-glorifying words have their origin that we see in Daniel 4 verse 27. Okay, that finally bring God's judgment upon him. And we will not read it. I have it in the record, so you can read it. That is because he was a builder, and he really glorified and beautified Babylon. Now, if Nebuchadnezzar was such a very ambitious builder, was he maybe also building on a tower? Now, this is me writing here. In a long inscription, Nebuchadnezzar speaks of an old tower in the Babylonian Empire that stands in a place he called Bar-Zippah in Chaldean, which means something like tongue tower, tower of languages, which sounds like a strong connection with the old Tower of Babel. And now I'm quoting, "The tower, the eternal house, which I founded and built. I have completed its magnificence with silver, gold, other metals, stone, enameled, bricks, fire, and pine." Now, just to make it clear here, this is now Nebuchadnezzar writing. "The first, which is the house of the earth's base, the most ancient monument of Babylon. I built and finished it. I have highly exalted its head with bricks covered with copper. We say for the other, that is, this edifice, the house of the seven lights of the earth, the most ancient monument of Bar-Zippah. A former king built it, they reckon 42 ages, but he did not complete its head. Since a remote time, people had abandoned it without order expressing their words. Since that time, the earthquake and the thunder had dispersed its sun-dried clay. The bricks of the casing had been split, and the earth of the interior had been scattered in heaps. Merodach, the great lord, excited my mind to repair this building. I did not change the site, nor did I take away the foundation stone. In a fortunate month, an auspicious day, I undertook to build porticos around the crude brick masses and the casing of burnt bricks. I adapted the circuits. I put the inscription of my name in the I don't know what's wrong here, of the porticos. I set my hands to finish it and to exalt its head. As it has been done in former times, so I founded it, I made it. As it had been in ancient days, so I exalted its summit." And this is quoted from the London Quarterly Review. And there's obviously missing a word there. I don't know why. So Nebuchadnezzar was building, and he's clearly referencing here to Bar-Zippah, okay, the Tower of Languages. And he says that he restored the tower there, or tried to restore it, that a king built, okay, but the people, they abandoned this place without order expressing their words. Now, what he's referring to, he's referring obviously here to this language issue, confusing the languages. Okay. And by the way, this Bar-Zippah, okay, this place where this all took away, that he's referring to, is also called Bil's Nimrod. Okay, so we again have the connection of Nimrod to this Tower of Babel. But that's just a side note. Now, like with the Old-Babylonian Empire, there was no capable successor that would have followed Nebuchadnezzar, and so finally Babylon was conquered by the Persians. Alexander tried to rebuild the Tower of Babel, but it didn't work. Before he could do that, he died in the age of 33, I think. I don't know exactly, or 34. Now, why am I emphasizing this tower issue here? And we will see this in the next topic in part B. But there's a reason why I do that. Okay, now the Bible is telling us that there will be a final attempt in building the kingdom of Babylon. And here again we have these four actors: the harlots, the kings of the earth, the merchants, and the shipmasters of the earth, the inhabitants of the earth. And as I said, this clearly indicates that we are dealing here with a global system. Okay, all the time it says of the earth. It's not a locally limited issue that's going on here. This is a worldwide spread system. Now we will have a short look at the different actors, as I promised, and we will begin with the harlot. In Revelation 17, we find the harlot. It says, Then one of the seven angels talked with me, saying to me, Come, I will show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast, which was full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, having in her hand a golden cup full of abomination and the filthiness of her fornication. And on her forehead a name was written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. So what can we say about Babylon? Now, Babylon is depicted as a harlot here. And a harlot is an unclean woman. And she stands thereby in contrast to the clean woman in Revelation 13 that stands for God's pure church. Now, this harlot is called Babylon, and both are images that are taken from the Old Testament. Harlots you find with Israel. God is referring to Israel being a harlot when they became unfaithful, when they run after idols or so, and they did not follow God's commands anymore. God titled them being harlots. Okay, that's an expression that God used for his people, for his apostate people. So that means we are dealing here with an apostate church. Babylon is God's enemy in the Old Testament that is fighting his people, that is taking his people captive. Now the Assyrians did it as well, but somehow Babylon is the one that really is the focus upon. And this has to do with the fact that Babylon is a type for the Antichrist and for this anti-Christian system. So Babylon being the enemy that is fighting God's people. Now, if the Bible is taking these two symbols, harlot, meaning God's, the apostate church, so to say, and Babylon, God's enemy, that is taking God's enemy captive, that God's taking God's people captive, we can say that, or we have to say that this woman here means an apostate church that persecutes God's true people and is taking them captive. So here again we see God's enemy in a Christian clothing. Okay, it's an apostate church. It has a Christian look, a Christian appearance. Okay, here again we see this. And also interesting, just more side information here. It says that she is clothed in purple and scarlet and covered with gold. And we see this in a moment. Now, how did the reformers and the persecuted church of the Middle Ages understood this symbol? And they very simply understood it as being the Roman Catholic Church, because she was this apostate church that persecuted God's people and took them captive. And just because of this purple, scarlet, and gold issue, it's also for me very funny that the Roman Catholic Church chose purple, scarlet, and gold to be their colors. Okay, I mean, this is just a very interesting and also fascinating side information. So we are dealing here with the Roman Catholic Church. And you maybe remember in our last presentation we had Drew Kriesner, okay, this theologian, that said these are the basics of Protestantism, and there is no discussion on this, that Babylon, this harlot, is the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, and that's how Christianity has understood it since ever, since she could understood it like that. Now the kings of the earth. The kings of the earth, the kings are the chief of states, meaning the presidents of the world, obviously. Now it says that they commit fornication with the harlot. Now, and we have to stop here. What does that mean? And we have to do some covenant theology here. And to a covenant there are belonging certain issues. You have the covenant parties, you have the covenantal theme or the content. What is this covenant about? You have the covenantal requirements, you have the covenantal act, the covenantal sign. Now, not in every covenant all these things are present, but in some are present, and in some covenants all are present. And we take marriage as a covenant here, and let us just go through this. The covenantal parties are man and woman in a covenant, according to the Bible, the biblical marriage covenant. The covenantal theme, the content, what is this covenant about? What is the goal? And it is that man and woman become one flesh, like it says in Genesis 2. Okay, let me just say here, why should they become one flesh? Now, Adam was originally one flesh. But God divided Adam, so to say. He took a rib from him and he made Eve from that rib. So to say, God divided Adam and he made a new Adam and Eve. So God divided man, and in marriage, this division shall be undone. So man and woman shall come so close in the marriage as if man is one again. So Adam and Eve should have come so close that it is as if Adam would have never been divided, so to say. Okay, this is a very high standard for marriage, a very high standard. I'm saying this because some people, reduce this one flesh to sexuality. Yes, and sexuality is in there, but it is more. It is becoming one mind, one heart, everything one. Okay. The covenant requirements. So what is the requirement that this covenant is valid? It's faithfulness. And if a man or if the woman is unfaithful, the covenant is broken. The covenantal act is the wedding night. And the covenantal sign, you don't find it in the Bible, but in our Western cultures, it would be the marriage ring. Okay. Because the covenantal sign is there in order to remind us of the covenant. That's why the sign is here. We have 1 Corinthians 6, and this text is quite helpful for us now. Paul is writing here, "Or do you not know that he who is joined to the harlot is one body with her?" So Paul says, if I'm visiting a harlot, I'm becoming one body with her. I'm becoming one with her. And he says, for the two, he says, shall become one flesh. And he is referring back to this marriage, to this covenantal thing. Now what he's basically saying is, when I'm going to a harlot, I'm becoming one flesh with her. I'm marrying her, so to say. I'm in covenant with her. And that's why I'm breaking the covenant with my wife, because I'm now in a new covenant. Okay? And now it says that the kings of the earth commit fornication with the harlot. And that means that the kings of the earth, now we are in symbolic languages, okay? It doesn't mean that, okay, it's symbolic. But we have to understand what is the symbolism talking about. And the symbolism is talking about that the kings of the earth, they enter into covenant with the harlot. So there are some covenantal relations there. On the political scale, of course. Okay? Not on the sexual scale, please. On a political scale. So they enter into covenants, political alliances are formed. And I wrote here, they are in the service of a higher goal. Because they are now in service of this world system that is to be set up. Okay, and this world system is the higher goal. And that means that national interests have by times to be subordinated to the interests of the harlot. Okay. So in case of doubt, decisions have to be made in detriment to to the detriment of the own nation, and if it is necessary, to promote the higher goal, to promote the global goal. Okay. And I think if I look into politics today, and when I see what decisions our government is making and the parliament, I think you can clearly see this point that the global well-being is superior to the local, the national well-being. Okay. But anyways, the result finally is, and that is also interesting, that the harlot reigns over the kings of the earth. We haven't read it, but that's what the text is saying. That's the final goal. That's the final result of this whole thing. The harlot will reign, and that means the Roman Catholic Church will reign over the kings of the earth, and that thereby she will reign over every nation. Now the merchants of the earth. It says they become rich through the abundance of her luxury, because of the trading opportunities. And obviously the merchants of the earth, they are interested in the system because they have advantage. They take advantage out of it. And they are called the great man of the earth. So who are the merchants of the earth? We have to translate this into our today's world, and we would say these are the large corporations and the banks, for example. Now, there are no alliances mentioned here. Okay, it's not said that they are in alliance with the harlot, but they certainly have an interest that this system is set up because it offers to them huge trading opportunities. And yeah, but it says too that when it's addressing, the text is addressing in Revelation 18:23, the harlot, says that your merchants were the great man. So maybe there is still some subordination to that system by the merchants of the earth. And then we come to the inhabitants of the earth. And they are made drunk, it says. So you have 4 actors in this world system. 3 of them are taking advantage out of it somehow. They are active. The inhabitants of the earth, they are the ones that are passive, and they are basically the ones that's what the text is saying us, that are suffering from this whole thing. They are made drunk, whatever that means, in a moment. They are handed over by their kings, okay? Because the politicians of the earth, they commit fornication, they enter in some alliances with the harlot. The harlot reigns over the kings of the earth, and thus reigns over the nations, and thus reigns over the inhabitants of the earth. Now, what does it mean that they are drunk? Now, drunk does mean that the mind is numb. So they don't or can't see the things how they really are, the way they really are. They can't see it. They don't see the reality. Okay, they have a completely twisted way to realize things, to recognize things. Completely twisted way to think. Their discernment is affected. And again, if I'm asking myself, can I see this today, that people are somehow, their discernment is affected. They do not see things the way they really are. And you can present before them facts, and it's like they're looking through these things. It sometimes really is crazy. I don't know what's going on there. So it already feels for me like we are on the way to reach this numbness, this numb mind of the people. But it will increase. Okay. Now this is the system: harlots, kings of the earth, merchants of the earth. So this is a threefold thing here. And if we translate this means the papacy, the chiefs of state, and large corporations and banks. So these 3 join hands. And the inhabitants of the earth, they are the ones that are suffering. So it's me and you that will suffer under this system. So that is this global system. It's composed of these 3 actors. And as I already told you in the last presentation, as we saw that the 10 horns, this world union, in the next presentation we will have a look at, is this system that we are expecting already in work. That's what we see in part B, and so stay tuned and make sure you look at this video also. God bless.